Season 4 is a major change in Silicon Valley because now the guys are actually all broken up. In this season, we find that Richard has to move on from Pied Piper and actually create a brand new company. So we learn about a brand new path for Richard's technology, and we see whether or not the guys can actually come back together in a new company, in a new technology.
In style, is there any change?
The style of the company is changing, and all of the characters have to change as well. First of all, they all get some new responsibilities. Look out for Dinesh getting some pretty difficult new responsibilities as a leader within Pied Piper. And Richard also has to come to terms with the idea that the beloved platform that he created is actually not going to work. And so now he has to find a new path for him and a way to make his technology get to not just a couple of people, but actually millions of people in order to get the money he needs and the success that he wants.
Some people says Always Blue is anti-style of previous seasons. Do you agree with that? Always Blue.
Always blue, always blue. There is so much to say about this next season, and at the very end of season 4, we leave a lot of open questions about how the guys are going to actually take their technology to the next level. But here's what we do know. There is a new internet, and it's on refrigerators. So Always Blue, I think in previous seasons, was a way of ending things on a great note. Here, we're ending things on an open note.
Okay, but there is an obvious change in season 4. And can you share with us any reasons?
Season 4 was something that took a lot of thinking because now, after several seasons, the guys are all trying to figure out a new path for their technology. But here's what we found. There is always a path with innovation, and Richard is a genius, and he's full of new ideas. And so in season 4, what we find is that the guys are able to have a brand new path and opportunity for themselves to succeed. But you have to wait because it doesn't come quickly, and it definitely doesn't come easily.
And Richard is geeky, isn't he?
Sorry?
Is he too weird?
I think Richard is a perfect poster child for Silicon Valley because
Sometimes he's very funny.
definitely. Richard cannot help himself. He's somebody who has a lot of difficulties in being able to explain himself. He can code perfectly. He can talk not so perfectly. So the goal for us as the creators and the writers of the show is to be able to find a way for Richard to get into the craziest scenarios. But what we do know is that in the end, he always comes out on top because he's geeky, but also really, really smart.
So you love Richard.
Me? Oh. I've met so many people in my career who are very similar to Richard. And here in China, there must be millions of people that are just like Richard. Smart and determined and entrepreneurial. And of course we love him because we want him to succeed.
But he has no money at first. And he's very kind.
Yeah, very few people who come to Silicon Valley actually have money. What they have is an idea and a dream. So our journey with Richard is that he has a brilliant innovation in creating a compression technology. And his problem actually is not that he has no money, is that he has too many options of money. He has challenges in actually telling investors no at the beginning. And then over time, it gets more and more interesting as the company itself starts to struggle. And in season 4, what we learn is that they actually have to make it on their own. And so we'll see if they succeed.
So you don't need to glorify the wealthy people in your show.
I think the show manages to make fun of just about everybody in Silicon Valley. So there are some people who are very rich, and we definitely make fun of them. And there are some people who are struggling at just the beginning, and we laugh just as much at their struggles as well.
We can see ourselves in the show.
I certainly hope so. I've been really impressed with how in China there's a new startup culture, which is very big and it's growing. It's amazing to see how many new startups are here in China. And I think that a lot of the stories that we have in Silicon Valley are probably happening right here in China as well.
Some of the boss has bad temper, is very picky.
Definitely. There's always challenges. In our show, one of the biggest bosses is Gavin Belson, and he's incredibly difficult to work with. And so in this upcoming season, Gavin faces a lot of challenges because now for the first time, he actually has a competitor. And so we see whether or not he's able to survive.
He's lucky, some lucky guy. But someone could not survive when they face this situation.
Mm-hmm.
He's same in China.
Yeah, startups are not for everybody. The way that it's been described to me is that being in a startup is a little bit like eating glass. You have to love a very painful experience and to be determined. But if you can succeed, it is a success beyond your wildest dreams.
So is there any prototype of the story?
The show is written in a collaborative fashion. So we have some of the best comedy writers in the business. Mike Judge and Alec Berg, who created the show, are absolute comedic geniuses. And they put together a whole team of people who come up with the story for the show. The prototype, actually, it doesn't exist. Every year, we start from zero, and we decide on how the story is going to come together. And we use comedy writers. We also use a lot of technology consultants. There's over 200 engineers and technology experts who come together, and every year they help us be able to tell a story that is really funny and also really accurate.
Yes, I see. One of my friends guessed it's a story about the Jobs, who made Apple. And what's your view about Jobs?
Oh, I grew up loving Steve Jobs. He was like a rock star for me. And I used to go, totally, right? And I used to go to conferences in which I used to listen to him speak, and every word that he would say, I listened to. And I was incredibly sad to see him pass. But we love Apple, and Apple is still here, which is a way of living his dream is able to live on.
Okay, I'd like to know what's your contribution to the show. And we're curious about where you find the materials for the scripts or the source of the inspirations.
So I'm a founder of several companies myself. I've worked in many startups, and I've also been an investor. So I've invested in many startups. And my role in the show is to work with the comedy writers to be able to make sure that every detail of the show is as accurate as possible. And the way I do this is I find a whole network of people that help us to create the story. We have around 200 people that are actively working with us to make sure that every single piece of plot or dialogue or character is completely accurate in the show. And my job is to take all of this and to try to help the writers make it funny.
So do you like to make up sentences by yourself?
The dialogue of the show is something which is actually very carefully scrutinized. You see, our audience is actually very technically aware. We have engineers and very senior people in Silicon Valley that watch the show, so we have to make sure that every sentence is completely accurate. Every bit of dialogue makes sense for very, very technical people. It is very hard, yeah. So.
Because audience may take the show seriously and point out a lot of mistakes.
Right.
Can you give us any examples? Interesting examples.
One of the most controversial episodes that we had from a technical perspective was in season 2. We had an episode where one of the characters takes a bottle and he puts it on top of a keyboard and presses the delete key. and suddenly we have millions of files which are deleted. And it's a big crisis on the show. And people asked us, how is this possible that you have a single bottle of alcohol, putting it on top of a keyboard? Could that actually delete files in this way? And the answer is yes. We actually had 3 security experts work with us to be able to define exactly how it's possible. Even if it's rare, it still is possible to do this. So the internet, when they saw this episode, they went completely crazy. And people were criticizing the show, but also we had a whole group of people who are fans of the show on the internet saying, wait a minute, this is actually true. And so they defended us as well.
Do you ever afraid of some people cannot get it or cannot catch it? They think it's not so funny.
My mom still laughs at the show, and she's not an engineer. We try to make the show something that everybody can appreciate and understand. And I'll tell you why. Today, everybody's lives is touched by technology. The phone in your pocket has many apps, each of which are an essential part of your life. Like here in China, Tencent has WeChat, and you cannot even exist without WeChat. It's an essential part of your life. And so our show, it asks a question. What if you have an idea and you actually want to make the next WeChat? And the goal is for us to be able to present to you a story about how that is actually possible and all of the crazy things that can happen to you if you decide to create your own technology.
Yes, and we can expect more romance in the coming seasons. I know there in a lot of love story in the season 4.
Yeah, well, romance is very difficult in Silicon Valley because people are working pretty hard, and the guys there are they're a little different. So we have a journey with all of the characters. Many of them find love. It should be noted that Jared is by far the most successful with women, and I think this season you actually have a chance to see this, which is pretty unexpected and pretty funny as well. Sure, of course. Well, one of the ways we think about it is that we actually tell the story of women engineers. And one of my favorite characters in the show is one where it's actually a female engineer who was hired to work for the company. And in Silicon Valley, this is actually pretty rare. There are far less women engineers than men. Here in China, actually, it's very different. In senior technology positions here in China, 80% of the 80% of the executives are actually women. And so it's pretty exciting to see that China is actually very progressive in allowing both men and women to work in technology.
So what's the difference between the Big Bang and the Silicon Valley, you think?
Both are great shows. I think that Silicon Valley is the story about some really young people who are trying to grasp a dream of trying to create a really impossible technology. And one of the things that is so inspiring about our show is that we take a very small idea, how to create a compression technology, and now, all these seasons later, we're dealing with a much larger issue. It's how to create a whole new internet. And so our goal with this upcoming season is to tell maybe even a bigger show than Big Bang Theory, because we're talking about changing the entire internet with this technology.
Yes, but as a female, I expect more romance.
Sure, I understand. In the end of the day, these guys that work at Pied Piper, they have one mission, and the mission is not to get married. It's actually to go and actually create really cool technology. And this is why they wake up every morning.
I want to see how they fell in love with others. Yes, and I noticed that there is a line from the first season. It's weird. They always travel in groups of 5. These programmers, do you remember that sentence? And one of them is skinny, tall guy, and one of them is Asian, short guy. And one of them is fat guy. One of them is Indian guy.
Right. So one of the cool things about the technology industries is that they are one of the biggest sponsors of visas in the United States. And what they do is many of the technology companies, they hire people from all over the world in order to come and work for them. They want the very best of the best, and they understand that maybe they would find that person in India or in China. And so they have a very aggressive way of trying to find the best people, and they don't care whether that's in the United States or whether that's in the world. I think this line is funny because it shows that even when you put all of these people together in a company, they have to work together. And that's one of the cool things about Silicon Valley is that it's really about teamwork in any way with any people.
Yes, I found that interesting. Yeah, and we noticed that Jin Yang has more play in season 4. Any reasons about that?
Sure. So Jin Yang is probably one of the most underappreciated characters that we have. His relationship with Ehrlich is pretty difficult, but here's what we find in season 4 is that Jin Yang is actually very talented. He's got an amazing mind and he's a brilliant programmer. So stay tuned for more on Jin Yang in season 4 because actually he turns out to be a very, very big success.
Yeah. Okay. And why is design as a menu? And is this due to the Chinese cooking culture?
The application that he designs is actually a very powerful piece of technology, which is based on artificial intelligence, or AI. This is something that China is actually very progressive in. There are many companies here in China that are some of the best in the world with artificial intelligence. So Jin Yang takes this very powerful piece of technology and he uses it to create an application which is for identifying food. And it's pretty funny what the results are because it's not what you expect. I think so. And Jin Yang is pretty hungry. He's eating quite a bit.
Because he loves Chinese food, so he designed a menu of cooking.
Well, the application actually goes well beyond just a recipe book. So if you watch the season, I think you're going to be surprised that the technology is actually pretty powerful. And it might give you some answers that you never really expected. Yeah, maybe a hot dog application can actually change the world. Let's see.
You know, programmers are often teased in China. And what about in USA?
Programmers have a pretty tough life, doesn't matter which country that they're in. I think what's interesting now is that because of the success of technology companies, the idea of being a programmer is actually pretty cool in the United States. Some of the richest people in the United States are actually programmers. So this has actually changed the perspective. And now it's kind of the revenge of the nerds. Maybe when they were younger, they were not too popular, but when they're older, they become some of the most important people in the United States.
But I think some of them are very rich.
That's right. Yeah. They grew to be huge successes. So next time that you decide to make fun of a programmer, think twice because they could turn out to be a pretty successful person. Programmers are special people. They're very different, and it takes time to understand how to even speak with them. My dad is an engineer, and I've had, I guess, many, many years of training as to how to talk to engineers. But you asked for some love tips before about how maybe a woman can meet a nice programmer. I think the answer is to be very, very patient and very clear. Absolutely. No doubt about it. You just have to find a way to create the right type of code to be able to program them exactly as you need them, and any engineer will do exactly what you want.
What did you look like when you were in a startup in your early days?
So I've been involved in many different startups, and my job is actually, or used to be, very similar to Jared's job. I was kind of the only adult in the room. So there was chaos and confusion, and my job was to be able to create a calm atmosphere and the ability for people to be able to succeed. This was not so easy because it's a little bit like being a parent. You have to say no a lot, and you have to be actually very strict in how to move forward. But over time, people grew to love me and find a way to make me a key part of the team. But it's hard. Every startup is harder than you can ever imagine.
It's a hard life. Is it very hard in your life?
Sure.
Some people in your early time, it's a hard time. Really a hard time.
So most startups actually fail. This is the truth because people are doing things that are very new and it's hard and it takes time in order to gain acceptance. But the important thing is that you have to keep trying. What you find is that most people don't just do one startup, they do many startups. And this is really important to keep trying and trying until you finally succeed. I think this is one thing that the show is actually really good at painting a story about because no matter what, all of the challenges after 4 seasons, Pied Piper is still standing, and in fact, it has a better chance of success than it ever has before. So if you have the dream, you have to hold on to it and keep trying as much as you possibly can.
So you like to express your feelings in your early times in Silicon Valley. You can express that.
My very first job was in Silicon Valley, and it stayed with me. I've lived now through several different major periods in Silicon Valley in which there's been a lot of success and a lot of different failures. But for me, it's home, and it's a very special way to be able to work with the show because I'm able to tell a story about my hometown and the people that I grew up with.
So did you see yourself in Silicon Valley?
I do, yeah. There's many different characters that are kind of telling stories that are very familiar to me. And I think that one of the things that's really exciting is that the show has enjoyed a lot of success inside of Silicon Valley. Many people that work in technology companies say the show is very realistic, maybe even more realistic than a documentary. So that's pretty cool and very exciting that the writers are so talented that they're able to create such an accurate show.
So which character is more similar?
I think I am the closest to Jared out of all the characters because my job used to be able to create calm amongst a lot of chaos. But honestly, I see little pieces of myself in all of the different characters because this is the great thing about the show is that it's telling many different stories from many different perspectives. And I think here in China, people will see actually a lot of similarities. They can find in their own company a Dinesh or a Guilfoyle or a Richard or a Jared. These are kind of eternal characters that can last forever and in kind of any different circumstance.
I'm curious about who was the first person to mention the idea that, hey, let's make a comedy about Silicon Valley instead of a drama. And it is much harder to make a comedy than drama.
Sure. So the original show was created by Mike Judge. And Mike actually has a history. He used to be in Silicon Valley as an engineer. So he decided to work together with HBO to go and create a story about how a small startup succeeds. And he had the good fortune of being able to create a team together with Alec Berg, who is a really famous writer who worked on Seinfeld, which is a really popular show in the US. And it was this combination of Mike, who had the experience and a certain brand of humor, and Alec, them coming together to create this really incredible show. We were thankful that HBO was really able to give them a platform to tell the show in such a unique way. We're now 4 seasons later, and it's because of a lot of great support from people in all parts of the HBO network.
How detailed that you will monitor the show, maybe a line on a piece of paper or something that written on a whiteboard in the show, how detailed that you are monitoring? Are you challenged sometimes?
There is no detail that is too small in this show to get accurate. So take a look when you're actually watching this show and you'll see some pretty cool things. For example, on some of the whiteboards, you actually have full equations of math and coding that if you actually did the math, you'd find out it's completely real. You may even find that there's some of the code that's on there which has hidden messages inside of it. So we spend a lot of time to make sure that every piece of dialogue, but then also everything that you see on the screen in the smallest detail is something that you can actually think of as almost like a code where you're able to unlock a secret message within it. It's really exciting to have Silicon Valley here in